With that, we will get started on tonight's program. We have Lyndsay Knecht and Christopher Mosley. Did I say your name right, Lyndsay?
It's okay. It's Connect. But yeah, it's both.
Yeah, well, my name is Lichlider, so I get it. No one really says it right. So I'm glad I asked. Lyndsay Knecht and Christopher Mosley. They're two writers and critics in the city and in the state that we brought on to talk about art criticism from a couple different vantage points today. So we're going to talk about it from the vantage point of an artist and from an art critic, and then kind of talk about how it functions as a whole. And they're going to be great at giving us that information. And it is a Q&A. So if you see down at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you're going to have two options. You got the chat, which you can say hello, and you can make comments, you can drop links. Those are things that I'm going to be doing as we talk. And then if you have a question you'd like to pose, please put it in the Q&A, which is a different box. That's really helpful so that we keep track of our questions and nothing gets lost in the chat. So do take care for those two things. And then that we can kind of get going. So critique. I have questions for you guys. I know that you have some places you want to start with because it's kind of this big nebulous topic, right? So why don't you go ahead by telling us a little bit about yourselves and your career, and then we'll get into the topic itself.
Okay, so let's see. I started being serious, I guess, about writing in 2006. So I don't feel like doing the math right now, but it was a while ago. And I, just like a lot of us, really came at it from the point of the kind of democratization of, having your voice heard online. If I'm being totally honest about it, my first review, I think, was actually posted in like 97. So I was posting online in high school, and I started taking it seriously years later. But usually I was just spending so much time on comments, the dreaded comments section. And I would spend so long that eventually an editor invited me to be a contributor. So very kind of strange backdoor way, but maybe that happens for more people than we know. So, and I've just been writing what feels like almost daily ever since then, and have been able to turn what was once kind of an obscure hobby, it felt like, into something resembling a career. So yeah, Lyndsay.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I like how pure it feels to look back on those first impulses to do this. And so I appreciated that you mentioned being emboldened by online sort of venues and the idea of starting there. I was writing for my high school newspaper, and there was a theater, it was a sub, Isaiah Evans, who's in the music scene in Dallas now. But he was a sub, and he helped us with the newspaper at my high school. It was a very small private high school. And he asked me to write about music for this website he had at the time called Magic Bullet. And so I took it very seriously that he asked me, and I was so like, just to draw connections between, bands and other things I was learning about, and, and be able to write in that way. And also first person was really exciting for me. Then I started noticing too, a lot of stories I loved about artists were written after they were dead. And it really bothered me as I started coming into my own as a writer, that profiles, that I didn't see more artist profiles. And so that was my first kind of love in arts writing, was to write profiles. And I still really love doing that. But from those impulses, I started, I worked as a copy editor. I've been in radio. I've done work for a number of print publications, but I feel the impulses are still the same, just finding ways to do that when they're dwindling. And as Chris said, trying to turn something that's a real passion into a way to live, because I mean, time is finite. So it's been the only way I've been able to continue to do that is through hustling in that way. So
awesome. Yeah, I think those are like no stories are the same, but that all makes sense. So you both have been doing that just kind of forever. Well, it's, you're talking about new artists and kind of cracking into things, and I'm curious, I guess, to get into some of the history or the background or the kind of foundation of how you guys see critique functioning in the arts. Can you talk a little bit about that?
You want to take that first, or?
Sure. So I feel as a writer, the kind of criticism that has been inspiring to me, even though I wouldn't necessarily classify myself formally as an art critic, I'm someone who, because of my work, I have to read a lot of art criticism, and I have to be really thoughtful about the way that I write. And art critics, are kind of at the nucleus of that struggle. So I was really excited when I learned when I was younger about Heresies, which is an excellent journal that a bunch of women in the New York art world in the late 70s they were writing for themselves and each other, and their process was as a collective. So they did a lot of self-editing, they did a lot of discussing their own work. And they also did a lot of kind of keeping each other accountable in ways that are really interesting to me. And because I like the idea of criticism as a way to move through the world, not necessarily something that you always do or make an object out of. That's really exciting to me. There was a lot of, sort of cross-pollination with artists at that time too, in that journal, thinking about poets writing at the time, Adrienne Rich wrote at the time, Audre Lorde wrote at the time for them. And so, that's definitely a place I like to sort of start. Another really pivotal book for me and moment was in 1995. There was a compilation of writing called Rock, She Wrote. Ann Powers was one of the editors. She now works for NPR Music, but at the time it was a big deal because it was a collection of women's writing about music. And there wasn't a lot of that. Even in the mid 90s, it was, put out by Delta, which was a big publisher. And it was exciting because it was women writing about, other artists, not just women, not just artists that you would necessarily expect some of these writers to write about. Bell Hooks is in that compilation of essays. Patti Smith. There's just a lot of crossing and like really exciting revelations about not only who these writers were fans of, but also kind of how they saw themselves in this world of music and of learning. So those are two sort of publications that I anchor myself to, and that make me feel excited about what else could happen. We tend to stop there, but they're really good models, I think, for how we can work together to kind of foster that community of criticism.
Yeah. So I definitely got into criticism, I think, by way of zines, especially were written in a covering both art and music in the underground, especially in the 80s, were probably my biggest influence. I brought a couple, but they had great names like Chemical Imbalance, and just very like, or Titanium Expose. They were there was something really kind of not so formal about them. and, there's also some stuff that's probably, has aged badly, but it had a big influence on me. And as well, I would also mention kind of the shadow history of criticism, where there's like letters to the editor, for instance, become very important. They seem like a throwaway thing, but I actually saved one. I'm just going to read a little part of it. It's so it's Adrienne Piper. It's her letter to the excuse me, the New York Times in 1990, and the letter ends with and she's addressing Roberta Smith, and she has this letter to the editor archived on her website, and I totally encourage you to look it up, because it's just so potent, and it's very explosive. I read this sometimes as a reminder to myself to always do your homework, check the checklist, make sure the titles are correct, because it's just, even though, Roberta's considered a huge icon of criticism, this is just basically it ends with this small paragraph. It would appear that the familiarity that Roberta Smith finds in my work depends on not having bothered to look at it at all. I would prefer that she not review my work in the future. Sincerely, Adrienne Piper. So this is, I think of boomerang metaphors all the time. And basically, Roberta Smith goes to this art show, thinks she's really nailed something, and then the artist's response is just so, if I were to read the rest of that letter, it's quite explosive and contains things that I wouldn't feel comfortable reading aloud. But I just love, from a really early age, I loved the dynamic between writer, editor, artists, like just all the background information you can find on that, and especially in some of these oral histories. Lyndsay and I talked a lot this week about The Beat and the Buzz, Inside the LA Art World, is a really great book that kind of gets really caught up in John Baldessari a little too much. It's actually really funny, because I think he has a quote on the back that says, "Oh, this is such a page turner." And it's like, oh yeah, because they mention you like 600 times. But yeah, these kind of, like, I'm really into things that are not so heavily manicured. I like the kind of rough back and forth that, you only can find out in histories later very often, of, who didn't, who had a problem with whom, and, did Rothko really hate pop art, and all these things that I don't know. I'm addicted to it. I stay up constantly, even at this age or doing it this much. I feel like I just never get tired of it. So the dynamic between all these different things, very often, I think when I wrote my first review that was supposed to be published, online, I ended up it was rejected, and I was so kind of brought down by that. But my editor said something really important. He said, "You just told me, you just told me what the music sounded like. You didn't talk about what the room was like. You didn't describe anyone in the room. You didn't describe." And he said, "You need to concentrate on everything except the art sometimes. Like you actually need to kind of take a broader look at, and so nowadays, and I think that's become much more commonplace, but, you look at everything from who funds the organizations, and who, all these other things. Like, and I know that slips away from straight art criticism and kind of gets more into reporting, but I think throughout history, these things, you realize it's never just the art, right? It's all a bunch of other factors. So, yeah.
There's a couple things I can go back to there, but one thing I do want to make sure we get onto is, this evolving role of art criticism and where we are today, where it used to be that there were these like full-time positions on every newspaper and every publication that would be devoted to art criticism. And now that so much of that work has been pushed into kind of a freelance position, if it's there at all, how do you guys see that functioning in the sort of like currency of art criticism today, and maybe what the dangers are of pure art reporting versus art criticism?
So this is something that's really dear to me. I believe very strongly in this idea of the myth of objectivity. So throughout journalism, in arts journalism and outside of it, it's just a myth, because where you come from, what your experience is, that is absolutely going to affect your read of something and your experience of it. And that to me is precious. And when that's killed, to me, there's so much lost, right? And this idea of imagining that anyone can be objective, right? Even in reporting, you choose who to quote, you choose where the quotes go, you choose many times what to cover, or editors do. So in arts reporting and criticism, that's 100% true. I do think that even though arts reporting is a very important record of what happens, there is a cultural record that that criticism contributes to. And, attitudes, like social attitudes at the time, comments are a great example of that, like collectively showing all of these different tones, and that is lost with straight art reporting for sure. And I think it's easy to be afraid to go off that path. I don't know why, but I've noticed just throughout working in almost every major market publication in Dallas in some capacity, I have noticed a big fear of that. It's something I'm always excited when somebody pushes. And and I think artists have a big role too in pushing that. Anytime, if I could leave anything with you all today, like anytime you read something and you want to respond to it, even if it's not about your own work, if it's just something that you read, don't hesitate to reach out to the writer, because sometimes those conversations start and like it's really productive, I think, for both sides. I think that could really spark something here, even if it was if you just decided that once a week, something that you read, you were going to reach out to who wrote it. But.
This is it's a pretty weighty subject. And it's one that I've, sort of have had to live in both worlds of reporting and criticism, and where's the line. And I do like the challenge of reporting. I like the challenge of as Lyndsay said, the myth of objectivity. Like it's I think when I was younger and probably put more curse words in my articles, etc. When I couldn't do that anymore, when I didn't have, when you can curse, an entire sentence could be one word. And when you lose that, then you're challenged to express yourself in other ways. But I will say I get to write occasionally for NBC has a pretty wonderful opinion vertical called Think, and they have almost complete freedom in your ability to write just pure criticism. And it's that becomes a totally different kind of challenge, because it doesn't really, suddenly you're not concentrating so much on facts, and you're able to draw parallels with everything from philosophy to pop music to you can just it's so broad, and you might just be talking about, the history of romantic comedies or something. They've really like, and I don't mean to like show too much favoritism. It's just that they seem to really understand that criticism can mean just about anything. Like it can reference. Writing those articles is always, it's a challenge, because I really like to go to the library, which I highly recommend to everyone. That not to sound dated, but there's so many things that are not on the internet, and I think people need to understand that not every single thing has been scanned into a legally downloadable PDF form or whatever. And you like, even the Dallas Public Library's collection of art books is just it's pretty mind-blowing. I mean, and a lot of the local institutions will donate catalogs, and you just find things in there that you wouldn't find otherwise. But I think that's been the library's been a secret weapon, which that sounds ridiculous, but it kind of has been, as far as being able to inform certain types of criticism I've written. For instance, basically one time I got to do an entire kind of tiny history of the contributions of Black Americans to country music. And you wouldn't believe how many books there are on that in the library. It's amazing. Anyways.
Well, it's interesting because, hearing you guys talk, like from my perspective as an artist, someone who's been through art school and has, taught, been in a like teaching academic role, critique is this kind of like everybody gets together. We talk about work, as a teacher, you're trying to draw students' genuine opinions out, to someone who's sitting right next to them, right? Like you're talking about the work in front of that person. And I think that there's a different kind of attitude that's then taken when maybe it's because you guys are writing on someone you're going to see later, or you're signing your name to it. It's not like this anonymous comment. There's a fear on both sides. There's the fear of the artist who's putting themselves out there to be critiqued, which is very much about, part of being an artist. And it's important that you're willing to do that. But then I think that there's also a fear of kind of like hurting people's feelings or trying to dance around people being defensive about what you might say. So I'm curious to know why you think artists need to open themselves up with critique, or advice you might have for making critique more palatable. Just sort of speaking to how to deal with that fear and that human nature to be defensive when someone might not only be saying the glowing things about your work, but also be giving like the things that need improvement or the things that just aren't working.
Who wants to go?
Yeah.
So first of all, I think understanding the process of a story, right? Of a story or a review. Understanding that there is also an editor involved, understanding that there is a veil between the writer and the subject, because there's also this audience or the phantom reader that sometimes either the writer or the editor imagines as a person who may not understand something, which it is something that I feel very passionate about that, because I feel like oftentimes we talk down to our readers and there's a missed opportunity for more dialogue. So sometimes what you're reading is not actually the most direct and pure like reflection of what the experience the writer had with your work. That's a really big thing to know. Another thing that I'll mention about this is I only recently, after 15 years doing this, have I started to make myself vulnerable on the other side as an artist. And I just now actually had my first ever like formal critique on Sunday of something that I had made. And I mean, once you understand everything that goes into, it's definitely going to change me as a writer to have gone through that experience. And I think understanding like we're learning the Liz in this choreography workshop, we're learning the Liz Lerman method. So like statements of meaning versus what an opinion is, which you would think, would be so easy to know. But I find myself even then like conflating the two or getting, not being clear in the moment, which is what you have to do in a live critique with people, with humans in a room. When you write, you go away and you think about it, and you may take 100 different like at bats, right? And so yeah, I am definitely still learning about that. But what I wish, and it's easy to say, it's harder to do, but what I wish for all of us, including writers who work with editors, which I wasn't always the easiest person to edit because I used to be pretty headstrong to a point that was probably unproductive. But I know that not taking it personally and thinking of it like bumper cars, and that even sometimes the chaos and the exchange there can, for me as a writer working with editors, it's made me tougher. It's made me really have to test my ideas. Gia Tolentino says that testing your ideas is the reason for writing, not sharing them. It's testing them. So I think that a lot of artists I admire feel the same about making art. So
as far as the straight critique that you're describing, like in more academic setting, if I can give like a sort of an origin story, basically, like, there's this cliche that critics are failed artists or they're failed musicians, and I think that's totally great. I actually think that they should be a lot of times. Just the way a food critic will often say, if you've never set foot in, front of house, back of house, a kitchen, a service industry job, then why are you critiquing food, etc. But so I was kicked out of a commercial art program in high school, which I despised because there is like a right and wrong to commercial art. You could actually, if you had a dot in the wrong place, you failed. Like and that was just maddening. So we were at an impasse, and so I then was in advanced art instead, and quickly critiques became my favorite part of the entire experience. Even when people were roasting me, I just was so entertained by it. And I think what I would say to people in the same thing, because I've had artists, I've had artists confront me in person and write me very unhappy letters. And my response is always that, believe it or not, a lot of it comes from like a place of love, which I almost hesitate to use that word, but it's just that I told a lot of artists, I'm like, I think about your work probably more than your parents ever will. And you should so it's, I care. I spent all this time with what you did because I care about it. And I may not have come to the same conclusion you did about its, theoretical success, but it's not because, not because I was phoning it in. But there's a really good book by, oh God, I hope I don't screw up the name. I think it's The Contemporaries by Roger White. He's a really great writer, and he did something that, you almost kind of fear about the ethics of it, but he wrote about his own students, which maybe that's more commonplace than I think, but it was a very it's one of the most illuminating just kind of descriptions of the tension that happens during a critique. And because it's all real, you know, he's describing literally. And there's some Dallas artists in there too. So it has a local tie. It's a really wonderful book. It kind of, as its climax piece, it has this artist who purposely kind of became more obscure, like by design, over like decades, which is like one of the most fascinating just like long-term projects I've ever heard of. Just like the idea of purposely becoming less successful is just like, I don't know, the book's really mind-blowing. I really recommend it.
I just dropped it in the link, and I just want to say that I'm not endorsing Amazon. It's just the first link I found. So. You know, buy your books from a place if you can. Yeah, that's really interesting to hear that point of view. I especially love the idea that, like, you know, you've chosen to write about the artwork, and so whether, you know, if it has some negative comments in there, like, you know, negative comments in there, is still something that you decided to dwell on. I know at the Students Union, we have member critiques, and it's kind of an interesting thing because the academia has been pulled away, the grading's been pulled away, and it's just, but it's still this formal thing that was set on a calendar. And that's one of the reasons a lot of people join our community is they're just like, you know, I've always shared studios with people. I now have a studio by myself, and I will be making something, and I have so little gauge on whether it's good or not sometimes, you know? And so we've talked about studio visits in past conversations at the Cedars Union. I just, you know, if there's a writer or a friend or anyone, I always encourage people to bring them into their studio and kind of bring them into their world, because it's just a really crucial part of making work is opening yourself up to what people think about it. Otherwise, you're just in a kind of your own echo chamber. So I just want to leave that there. There's something I was also going to comment on, but I lost it. I did, while I'm recomposing my thoughts, there was a really good question that came through from Chad Withers, who asked about the online publication, you know, with publications being more and more online, if the emphasis on online engagement has, I'm reading this wrong. Yeah, how has that impacted the critic's history or contact, with the contact info being more easily accessible? I didn't think about that. And then how does it change the content of critiques versus print media?
Well, I think the idea is fundamentally the same, that comments are really just light speed letters to the editor, basically. I mean, they're just, and I think, you know, you do hear stories of theater critics running into people in Manhattan bars and how terribly awkward that was sometimes. And I think the speed of it and maybe the amount has changed, but I think the idea is fundamentally the same. But I will say, like, you know, I used to write for an anonymous publication before I wrote for a magazine, and people would definitely try to, you know, find your name. I won't go into too many specifics, but they found my editor's address and left a very unpleasant gift on his doorstep that said that, and basically it said, "We know who you are." And you know, I I think there's always been, death threats and things like that. There's just more of them now, but I think the idea is fundamentally the same.
Yeah. What about as far as I don't know. I mean, the online, the quickness of it is different, right? I mean, actually, I could be wrong. Are like deadlines and the immediacy of getting things out there, how does that impact the artist side? I mean, the writer side.
Well, both Chris and I at one point had a job where it was pretty much the game. It was the game in town for arts critics and writers. It was the way, it was, the apex, I think, as far as regionally, like what one would want to have, like in the sense that you got to be an assigning editor, you got to write about art all the time, etc. And there was a really big focus on, of course, events and writing blurbs and getting hits, making sure that you balance the line was always to balance that, with criticism or longer form work. But time is time, and our brains are also finite. And I definitely feel like I have written a lot more short form, less thoughtful work. And there's something to be said for letting go and going with first thought, best thought, etc. But for me, that, it's still hard. One thing I will notice, or I will note about this subject, though, I was listening to the BBC recently. There was a really excellent podcast on criticism as it relates to art specifically, and the idea was brought up that the algorithm is the critic now, which if you think about that too long, it might make you dizzy. But to me, it just highlights again the real need and the real sort of special nature of having someone with their own set of experiences and their own library, in their minds, engaging with art, rather than this curation, this sort of more instant curation, which of course we know is how we spend our days now. But yeah, I hope that answers the question to some extent. I wish I knew. I thought about counting before this talk how many events or blurbs we had both written, but it's insane. It's dominant. For years it's been that way.
On that note, or this is kind of my next subject, you were talking about the way you might play a role in exposing readers to the arts, or having new artists be found. When you're talking about being disappointed in writing always been being done about artists who were no longer living, how do you see how does it work with media in terms of deciding what gets covered? How much control do you get over that? What can you kind of enlighten us a little bit on the process of pitching a story, but also your process of trying to find fresh faces to write about?
Well, to speak to the pitch process, I can definitely address that part. As a freelancer, that is the only way these days. Very, very rarely do I get an assignment. And that's just because as a freelancer, part of your job is to pitch pieces and to be out and to try, and populate the pages, get eyes on stories, etc. And so it's really fascinating. I had a year, just as everyone, struggled during lockdowns. I had a wild year, and I actually shared publicly a lot of the pitches I had that were rejected because I was pitching so often. And things got really obscure and maybe kind of desperate in the sense that you're trying to get someone to listen to you. Maybe this is a lot like being an artist trying to apply for shows or put language to your projects that gets you into an MFA program or gets you, and a grant, like it's the same, it's a lot of the same sensibilities because you're still speaking to a human. The idea of good and bad is totally like, what is that? I don't, because it's the person on the other end, and it's really fascinating because I was so lucky to find editors that I connected with and that trusted me, that didn't think that just because someone hadn't had a solo show yet, or, like maybe this was their first EP. Like I had people who let me write about that. And that is so precious. And I just feel so grateful to them for that. It's really rare. Jesse Gray, was a great example of that. The Tulsa Voice, someone who is from Dallas, like now at Southwest Contemporary, Lauren Tresp, who runs that magazine, has been, she does that with a lot of writers. And so it's exciting, especially if you're an artist thinking about writing, which I love it. I love it when artists start writing. Writing for publications. Of course, you've been writing, all of us are writing, but you know what I mean? Like I love reading artists writing. And so I hope that I will, at the end of this, I'll put my email in the chat. If you have any questions, I will show you the pitches that were rejected, the ones that were accepted, just as examples of how it's totally wild. Like you never know. All you have to do is just, you have to keep trying and be as thoughtful as you can about the readership, read the publication super hard, know what series they're into. It's a hustle. We're all, trying our best, but
I have a very different experience, mostly because I actually think, and I, professionally probably shouldn't say this out loud, but I'm not great at pitching, to be honest. It's actually, I find it to be, I find that there's like a sort of phantom arrogance. I'm like, why should it be me? Why should I be the person, And luckily for me though, I wrote for free every day for 5 years. And by the end of that, I had said so many things that I'm lucky enough that publications then came to me and said, do you want to do this or that thing? And so I do get a lot of assignments and I appreciate them. I actually appreciate them the most when they're about something that I didn't have any interest in whatsoever, because I love the sort of fly-by-night mini education you get about, a subject that you just didn't know you would care about at all. So it's a little backwards from Lyndsay's experience, but that's also, why I ask her for advice sometimes, especially with pitching, because it's just, I'm not exactly, I don't care to be first. That was always my thing. I was always, so that kills a lot of pitching, because the nature of a lot of these publications is, well, so-and-so already wrote about that, so we can't cover it now, which I think is kind of absurd, actually, because everyone's perspective is going to be different. And
Would you, I love that call for artists to be writers. I think that and a lot of artists are already writing about art a lot and talking about art a lot. Where do you just like write something and send it in? Where do you start? Like, how do you break into this?
Well, I was talking to Chris, we were just talking last night about how, there are certain publications that are very, straightforward about what they want in a pitch, what they're looking for. Hyperallergic is one that I think of first because they use Submittable, which a lot of you as artists, I'm sure, have Submittable accounts if you're applying for grants or residencies, and their pitch process is very, it's bell clear what they want. So that's fortunate. If you search hyperallergic how to pitch, there's just a post that tells you, how to do it. But then there are other publications where, you have to actually, you kind of have to make a relationship with the editor somehow, whether it be because you respond to something that they've written about, to ask questions. It's not about like sucking up. It's about like engaging and showing that you're invested in and interested in what, they're building, etc. I mean, that's one way to do it. More than ever though, if money is not an issue for you, if it's not that you're chasing stories because you are trying to make money off of it, I'm these days, I'm a fan of writing something and shopping it around until someone likes it, and wants to work with you on it from obviously it's not going to stay exactly the same, but I think that preserving your voice if you can is great. I mean, that's the dream, right? Is to be able to work really hard on something, to bring it to someone on your terms, and then them, accept the pitch. So there are some publications, especially journals, especially more things that lean towards more like arts literary journals, that will do that. But I have a list, Adrienne, of things like this that I always share with writers in classes and stuff, and I'll send it to you. I'm so happy to share it with anyone in this talk.
Awesome. Yeah, I can send it to the attendees.
Awesome. Love it.
Yeah, breaking in, I feel like, it's such an open-ended thing. I mean, that's a lot of actual good advice. I mean, you could build an editor trap and just put out a plate of pastries somewhere and you'll usually find one. I mean, the thing about being a freelance journalist is they're so very often pretty hardworking and underpaid. And so you'll, I mean, the commotion around free food at a press preview is just, it's so wild. Like you see like how like literally hungry people are. But more seriously, I think, if you have your own Substack or you just start writing somewhere first, so you can at least have some examples of what you do, so that you aren't just totally cold calling somebody. Just have some things prepared. But you'd be surprised, I think, how often editors are open to new ideas, because they are under a lot of pressure to constantly fill these needs for their publication. And if it sounds remotely interesting, you'd be surprised how often you get a shot. So.
Yeah, that does, that sounds familiar. I should also mention we're doing I'm trying to wrangle a talk on press releases later this year. So, that's another thing altogether.
I have a note on that, if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
So I was going to say that besides zines, one of the things I'm obsessed with is occasionally you'll buy some old publication or like an old record, and it will have an old press release in it, like some yellowed piece of paper from the 80s. And some of the writing on them, like, and I just think that we've come to a place where the press release is so formulaic. By its out of necessity, I get it. And you have a very short amount of time to convey your idea to someone and draw them in. But when you go back and read them from past decades, they were a lot more interesting. So I'm going to read from a press release written for a group in the 80s. And I found this in a record once. And I don't even know which paragraph to pick, but I'll just pick the final one again. And keep in mind, this is actually, he's trying to get people to come out and watch this band play. And so this is what it says. Honor Roll will be appearing in several major US cities this year. In the smaller towns, young people might leap upon the stage, steal the singer's microphone, and break bottles that will injure barefoot guitarist Penn Rawlings. In larger media centers, audience members will scratch their chins furiously before scribbling something completely stupid in their trusty notebook. You've never seen anything like it. I mean, it's so great. Like it's just, I mean, you would never get away with that today. I don't I haven't seen a press release like that in a long time. Lyndsay might have one.
Well, no, I just loved, I loved recently, and Polyvinyl put out that it was a pillowcase, right, with a pitchfork.
With a really mean review.
Yeah. And so there are different ways, I guess, people are doing it, but Chris is right. Whenever you look through, I just said it. Chris is right. Sorry,
Oh, wow,
everyone take a drink. Sorry, the press release has become such a form letter that my eyes are, they're so used to seeing the structure that it's like white noise. I just don't, and so I hope someone after this talk will go there with the 80s style one sheet, because they are very exciting.
I still write them occasionally sometimes as a freelancer, and I do my best to write in that kind of free spirit of a different time when you could be a little bit more interesting or catty or whatever. I just, it usually gets hacked out. The editor usually is like, no, this is not going to fly. But occasionally you get a sympathetic artist who's like, oh, I love how ridiculous this is. Like, I can't believe you said I was lonely in my basement when I made this, or whatever, like things that don't sound that appealing, but if they have some sort of ring of truth to them, I think you should say them, even if I think people like the rough edges around some things, and they should be kept in.
Okay, so since we're getting close on time, let me make sure I get to questions that people have. Oops, I did not mean to do that. Lisa, I'm sorry.
Hi, Lisa.
Do we have any?
How do I undo that? Oh my God. Hold on. Hide non-video participants, disable talking. Okay, got it. All right.
Do we have any questions that are more of a comment? Those are my favorite people at Q&A.
Always we've gotten through it. So one is, what do you see the benefit to artist, critique, and reader to be through the practice of artistic critique? And I'm wondering, Jennifer, if you mean, when you say artistic critique, do you mean like academic critique, or what do you mean by artistic critique? Let me give Jennifer a second to answer that, unless it was clear to either one of you.
I love that Jennifer mentioned reader, because one of the, when you're itemizing what, arts criticism versus arts reporting, what value does arts criticism have that arts reporting doesn't? I mean, I think it makes any of us a better reader, right? Even if we hate it, because we have to figure out why we hate it. And so I think that, if you're talking about just reading arts criticism, and what is the benefit of that? I mean, all of us know the critics or writers that we love, even if maybe we don't have the money to go to the show, or we're not in the same city or whatever, like you still get this great experience from reading that. And I think, there's no way, when someone has an opinion and a perspective and they are totally embodying that, it causes you to react, and in whatever way, right? That's like life-giving. So I like that. I see a reader there.
She did clarify and said, any critique within the scope of art. How do you see the players and their reasoning for engaging? So you kind of just answered that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, that is such an enormous question that you would not believe how many books there are about it. That's entirely subjective, I guess. I mean, everyone has their own reasons for doing anything, but I think back to what I was saying about, people perceiving a critique as they get defensive about it because, they feel misunderstood, etc. Like, I just, I would imagine all those people are involved because they do care. And I think to remember that is important, even if you feel they're completely wrong. And, it's your right to completely ignore critique and and double down on whatever idea you have, however dubious, I mean, that's your journey, and no one can stop you generally. Yeah.
Daryl had a question, Daryl Radcliffe. What do you think about critique being social media or done by social media? Instagram accounts like Dallas Art Critic. What is the place for long form criticism, or should it be TikTok or NFTs or memes?
I'll jump on that. I want to say very clearly to the many writers who I've seen getting very uptight about the world of Instagram criticism accounts, etc. You will not stop the tsunami. You are incapable of stopping it. It is our world, and to try to push back on it, I understand the desire to, but to just, and I don't want to sound, I don't want to dive into ages or generations or like anything like that, but I do think it is a little bit of a generational problem. And I think that you just can't stop it. So you may as well try to just jump in the water and just go with it and just ride it, because that's it. It's not going to change. There's nothing in our society that is pointing to this ever going away. So to sound, I mean, it just sounds completely sort of Luddite. And, there were people who really thought talking on the telephone was the end of our society. And I think it's hilarious to me how similar and futile that sounds. It's the same exact thing. You will not stop technology's continuing impact on criticism. I'm sorry. It's over.
Jerry, I'm assuming means Jerry Saltz, loves it. That's an older guy.
I was hoping we'd get through this without mentioning Jerry Saltz, but
oh, well, we're also it's 7, so we'll just gloss back over it. And I have 2 questions on Q&A too, but just to talk about like what Jennifer Wester was saying, and the chat is just like what your particular desires are for when you write about, this might not be what you're talking about, Jennifer, but now I'm curious. When you write about art, how much do you think about the artist reading the work?
I definitely, that's a case-by-case basis for sure. Some people are more intimidating than others. Some people are more, they have pet issues more than others, and it's very surgical and tricky sometimes. I allow as much as possible to, and some people will be like, maybe won't believe this, but I try to be an artist forward writer. I try as much as possible to let the artist actually explain what they're trying to convey, without me jumping in the scene and screwing it up. But there are definitely times where I'm afraid to publish. I'm afraid to hit, we're all expected to be our own cheerleaders, posting our work everywhere, expecting people to care. And I definitely am. I get gun shy. I'm human. I'm not fearless. I do think about certain artists with really heavy messages, and not screwing that up. That's all. Yeah.
Okay, 2 more questions and we'll wrap it up. Taylor Cleveland says, it seems like all reporting and criticism is biased based on the subjectivity of the critic's experience, the outlet or the publisher's politics, the actual or assumed reader, and the editor you're writing for. With this sort of myth of objectivity and knowing that an object is truth objective truth is impossible, what responsibility do you feel the art critic has to write with this awareness or ignore for the sake of a better story?
It's a wonderful question. Kind of, I think it also dialogues with the question just before this. And I think, because like, what responsibility basically do you have to the artist? And for me, I think so much when I'm writing about an artist, when even down to language, very small words in terms of phrase, I'm always trying to, and this might be controversial, I'm always trying to channel them in a way that's almost like acting. So recently I heard Hilton Owls actually articulate this in a way that I had never heard like said aloud, which is when you interview an artist and you're trying to figure them out, right? That like the story, if you want the story to be a reflection of them and of their work, especially if it's a profile about their process, it's almost like if you were an actor interviewing a person that was like the person the part you were playing. So if you were playing someone in a biopic, whatever, like that's, that's the way that I approach it. And I have become really passionate about that, almost as a kind of performing the other person. And so I do see it as a collaboration in a way that's pretty deep. And so that's one reason why I don't write as often, because I spend a lot of time on one story at a time for that reason. So I hope that answers your question.
I have a very simple saying about it that I developed at some point, and it is, basically when I get up in the morning, I tell myself, you're going to say nice things about some people in places that you may not like, but you're going to say nice things about them, and you're going to say uncomfortable things or criticize people who you find to be quite lovely. In other words, you're going to say bad things about nice people, and you're going to say nice things about bad people, right? Does that make sense? So I try to find that balance where I know for a fact that I've, like tried to find the truth or the best thing I can say about something that I just did not enjoy. I really, to the best of my ability, try to not ever lean too far into one direction. And I think if you already come pre-programmed with this idea that everyone is just a totally biased, just machine that's somehow working against your interest, then I actually think it says something more about you as a reader. I think that's an attitude that I'm not going to be able to fix. So since we know that, I'm just going to go ahead and write whatever I'm going to write. I try not to let that have an impact on me.
Awesome. Okay. And then last question is about podcasting. So how do you, since the spoken word versus written, since it is spoken word versus written, but how do you feel podcasts fit into our changing art critique language? I read that wrong, but you get what I'm saying.
This is a tough one. Okay. I follow like one podcast that's about conflict journalism, is the main one I really like. And it's a person who is going around the world to fairly off the grid war zones, and he's reporting on it, and he's putting himself in harm's way. To me, that is the height of what a podcast can be, because no news organization in their right mind is going to send this person there. And that's the kind of, I think, just off the beaten path thing that a podcast can do well. But the person who cares about journalism in me I get very concerned about the fact checking and the lack of a real editor a lot of times. Like, I mean, most podcasts I ever hear make me want to pull my hair out, because you can listen to people like rambling, saying the exact wrong thing for like 3 minutes, and it's mind numbing. I'm like, this would never happen if there was an editor involved. I just wish there were more good ones. And if you have any, send them to me. I'm glad to listen. My dream was always a 24-hour art station, and I'm sure that's probably existed before, but I always wanted like basically like, a BBC News that had constant tickers on the art world, and that just a totally art focused channel. So, I mean, you would think that I would be engaged with more podcasts, because that's probably as close as we're going to come in this lifetime to that is just not profitable. There's not an art caring public to make that profitable.
Like a whole other topic. Okay, well, okay, one last thing we've got maybe a touch more that we can go over is just, again, this idea of the reader, and how do I keep doing that? Hi, Kelly, sorry. How you understand, or how you imagine your reader for writing purposes. Like, so I asked previously about if you think about the artist, but like, do you have an imagined reader that you're writing for?
You want that first?
Mm.
I can take it. No, go.
Well, in short, it changes with each piece, but I think we all have people with whom we correspond and who challenge us. And I definitely, there are people close to me that I hold close to my heart that I think of. But honestly, the other part of it is sometimes it's my editor, especially if it's an editor that I really respect. I want to knock it out of the park for them. And there's a point at which, towards the end of the process, that's what exists, right? Before the story's out, before anyone else has read it, it's you and that person, which is like a very kind of hallowed space. But yeah, so Chris.
I much to the dismay of some of my editors, I try to trust my readers' intelligence as much as possible.
Yes.
I try not to over explain. I try to make references that they are free to look up. And that causes a lot of snags and snares. I get a lot of stuff sent back to me like all the time with, what on earth are you talking about? And it's like, and I just, I'm like, well, I love, my favorite kind of reading is when I have to stop every few sentences to look something up. I mean, that's so fun to me. It's all the kind of phantom footnotes that you're kind of making and having to put some work into it. So yeah, I respect you. I think you're intelligent, but I expect you're going to have to work a little bit. So I just think it's about respect.
Okay. Well, I love that you guys had this like arsenal of books to reference and to pull out. I think that would actually be a super cool addendum to this program, is like
the bibliography or
yeah.
There's other stuff that we didn't. Yeah. Well, I'd love to share.
I'll be honest, we worked quite a bit on narrowing down the references, so it's not all just totally off the top of our heads, but but I do want to encourage everyone, if you haven't taken a tour of the Cedars Union, you absolutely should. It's just a very fascinating place.
Yeah, Adrian, thank you so much for having us. This is definitely a bright spot, so thank you.
Good. Thank you. I really appreciate, this went in directions I didn't even think it was going to, which was always fun. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate everybody listening and asking questions. And, I hope my next press release that goes to y'all has something really funky and weird in it.
Thank
Maybe
you.
I'll write special ones for you guys.
Yeah, please.
Awesome. All right. Well, this is going to get posted on our website. Once it, gets almost not edited at all, it'll more or less be the Zoom conversation. But if you enjoyed what you heard and you want to recommend it to someone else, we do have a resource page on our website under our programs tab. Just give me a minute to put it up. I think if I'm not mistaken, I'm behind. And Lyndsay just shared her email address, and I'm always a big fan of encouraging people to reach out to, have these conversations. This whole art world system and whatever in Dallas works best when more people connect. So we're always really happy to help facilitate that. With that, I will let everyone enjoy their evenings, and I will hopefully see you at the Cedars Union.
All right.
All right. Thanks everybody.
Bye.
Have a good night. Hit me
Bye.
up.